I'm currently experiencing a car guy's nightmare. I am stuck behind a Toyota Prius in a no passing zone, and a Lamborghini. So by far the number one question that you guys have been asking me is what's next? I'm sure a lot of you guys watching this one probably saw my video going over my entire car history, where you would have seen that I haven't really owned too many cars beyond 2 years. Now off the top of my head, there's probably about 15 different cars that I would currently like to own, some more realistic than others, and maybe I can make a video on the unrealistic cars that I'd like to own in a future video. But for now, in this one, I'm going to share with you the 5 cars that realistically I can see myself buying in the near future. And just to be clear, if I were to get something new, more than likely one of the cars that I currently own would have to go. So in no particular order, the first car that I would really like to own at some point is a Porsche, but more specifically a GT3, and even more specifically than that, a 2016 GT3 RS. One question that a lot of you guys have asked me about my AMG GTR is why I didn't buy a Porsche GT3 instead. And the answer to that question is I was actually looking to get a Porsche GT3 before I ended up with the AMG GTR. That was never in the plans. It just came about because I found a really good deal on one, and it also happened to be a car that I really wanted to own. Going back to this past winter, I was looking at 2 2015 Porsche GT3s that were available locally. One had higher mileage than the other. I'd definitely seen some track time as well. The other one I don't think was really driven all that much. The price was fair for the most part, but I felt like the car was going to depreciate a little bit more. Given that I was buying it basically at the start of the winter, I figured that I could probably negotiate a better deal than what they were asking. Unfortunately, we could never come to the right price, so I never ended up buying either of those GT3s, and I did end up with an AMG GTR instead, which ultimately I've been super happy with the car. It's really, really impressive, but still, having a Porsche of any kind, let alone a GT3, is something that I've always wanted to have. I've driven a couple different 911s as well as the new 718 came in on track. They're all really impressive, but the GT3 thing, a more race-oriented variation of a 911, is something that I'd really like to have, and specifically a 2016 GT3 RS, based on the fact that I just think it's super cool, and the prices are definitely on the way down for the first time in several years. It wasn't until very recently, at least in Canada, that they were still commanding pretty much over list or exactly list price for a 2 or 3 year old car. The next car is really high up my list, and I'm honestly a little bit upset that I couldn't get allocation for one, and that is the new Ford Mustang GT500. Specifically one with the carbon package, because I wouldn't want a regular one, and ideally if I could spec one myself, it would end up looking like this, silver with blue stripes. The Mustang was my first exposure to a sports car, and say what you want about Mustangs, I know all the jokes are out there, but I really like them, and the GT500 for me really is the ultimate Mustang, and I think quite frankly, it could be the last of the true Mustangs, if that makes any sense, based on the fact that I'm not sure what Ford's plans are for the future, but it looks like they're getting rid of all of their cars. They have a concept, I'm not sure if they're actually going to make it, maybe they are, but the electric Mustang SUV, which I saw at the auto show. It honestly doesn't look as bad in person as I was expecting, but if that's the future of the Mustang, then I'd really like to own the last real Mustang, which I think might be the GT500. And even if this doesn't end up being the last hardcore Mustang, that doesn't really change my opinion of it. I still think it is one of the coolest Mustangs ever made. I love the incorporation of the carbon wheels. I think in person, the car has an incredible presence about it. I think the incorporation of a dual clutch transmission is something that's really interesting. The one criticism I will have about the GT500 is that I think it maybe is a little bit more expensive than it should be, especially when you have the option of a Camaro ZL1, certainly a 1LE. Is the GT500 going to perform better on a track? I guess it's possible, but I don't think that the gap is going to be as significant as the price differences between the two cars, but we'll see what happens with that. Also, have you heard the sound of the GT500? High price tag aside, I would still really like to order one if I could get allocation, but like I mentioned earlier, that's pretty much impossible in Canada unless you want to pay a huge premium. I've talked to a few different dealers, some of which I've purchased multiple cars from, including Mustangs, so you think I'd be pretty high up their list, but basically all the dealers in Canada are asking a premium of $25,000 to $35,000 over the already pretty high list price. I'm not a big believer in paying over list for a car, at least it's not something that I've ever done, especially when the reason why a car is commanding over list is simply based on hype. They haven't even really delivered many GT500s in Canada as far as I'm aware, so just based on demand and limited supply, they're going to try and charge this huge premium on what is already a very expensive Mustang. So for me, for that kind of money, I'm not sure that a Mustang would be my pick. I'd probably rather have a GT3 if I'm being honest, but should hype die down in the future, maybe allocation will open up, because I don't see Ford making the GT500 super limited. I think they're going to do the same thing as the GT350, where they're going to make it for several model years. So hopefully somewhere down the line I'll be able to order one and get it for list price, at which point I could definitely see one of those in my garage. Now the next car that I have on my list is kind of the car of the moment right now, and it is the C8 Corvette, where I have not put an order in for a regular C8, but I may or may not have a deposit down for the Z06 version, which is probably going to be available probably within the next 2 years. I basically daily drove a C7 Z06, and honestly I really enjoyed it. Obviously the new C8 is a completely different platform. Mid-engine changes everything about the car, and I'm very curious to see what it's actually like, because obviously everyone's excited about this, because from a value for money perspective, it's really hard to deny that that's not the best car for the money if you're just looking for maximum performance. And I don't want to say that I wouldn't be interested in a regular C8 should an opportunity to get one come about, especially given the current situation with the economy, and who knows what the car market's going to be like after this is all said and done. I want to drive one. I don't want to say that it's in my immediate plans to get a regular C8 Corvette. Z06 for sure, but again, if the right car came around, I would definitely be interested. And regardless of whether or not I actually get one, I definitely plan on driving one for you guys on the channel in the near future, so stay tuned for that. Now I hate the term dream car because I feel like that implies that it's like an unattainable thing, and I don't like putting that restriction on myself. But for me, if I really did have a dream car, it's the next car that I'd really like to own, and that is a Lamborghini Aventador SV. The two super expensive cars that I've owned in my life were a 2016 Lamborghini Huracan 610-4 and the Huracan Performante that I'm currently driving, both of which I have really enjoyed, and I'm glad that I've owned them. Still currently own the Perf, obviously, but if I had a specific Lamborghini that I could walk into a dealership and buy, it would pick over everything else, it's an Aventador SV. When you're talking strictly performance, while an Aventador SV is by no means slow, from a value perspective in terms of what you can get for your money out there in the realm of supercars, it's certainly not a great value for money. But for me, what's so special about the Aventador in general is the experience that it offers. The reason why I think so many people are excited about the C8 Corvette is that statistically, it is on par, if not a little bit better than a lot of these far more expensive exotic cars, especially now with the mid-engine layout. With that said, there's far more to a car than just statistics. If anything, I really feel like people are way too wrapped up in how fast the car is in a quarter-mile drag race when most of these cars aren't designed for the quarter mile. With that said, the experience of a Lamborghini, the experience of a Ferrari, the experience of these high-dollar exotic cars, that's part of what you're paying for. I guess you can argue with me on this, but I've been in a Lamborghini Huracan and I've also owned an Audi R8. The platform is the same, the engine is the same, the cars are the same in a lot of ways. They share so many of the same parts, but the experience of being in both of them honestly is way more different than you might expect. What I love about the Lamborghini brand, aside from the look, because nothing really looks like a Lamborghini, is the experience that it has on offer, where I think more so than any other exotic car brand, or at least cars in this particular price range, is while they're about performance, they're also very much about the experience, the sound. They're just brutal. I hate to use the word savage, but that's a good way to describe a Lamborghini. So is a Performante or a Huracan necessarily a better choice over a McLaren 720S? No, that car's probably way better in almost every single way, but it's not the same experience as a car like this. Which, circling back to the Aventador SV, I've never driven one. I have driven an Aventador before, specifically an Aventador S, and I drove it in absolute pouring rain. It was the worst possible conditions, but even in terrible conditions for a car like that, I still had probably the most exciting 20-minute drive that I've ever had in a car, period. On paper, in comparison to almost any other supercar right now, an Aventador is flawed in so many different ways, but the experience of it, the sound of that V12 engine, the way that it shifts and literally kicks you in the back of the head, it's really unlike anything else that I've ever tried, and quite frankly, I don't think that there's ever going to be another car quite like the Aventador. And the reason why the SV specifically would be my pick is, one, I think it is by far the best looking variant of the Aventador. Yeah, SVJ is really cool and probably a better overall car, but I just don't think that it's as clean looking as the regular SV. That's one of those cars that I would buy and I would feel absolutely zero need to touch that car and modify it in any way at all. But in the case of the SV, I just like the fact that they took the regular, already pretty brutal Aventador and made it that much more brutal, where I think with the S and certainly the SVJ, while they're still very brutal and kind of harsh cars in a lot of ways, they did certain things to try and make it that much more drivable, which again, I still think makes for a great overall experience. For me, the SV is the ultimate Lamborghini and one that I would definitely love to have in my garage. And part of the reason why I'm even considering an SV in the somewhat near future is because prices have actually been coming down. It's obviously a limited car, 600 coupes, 600 roadsters. I would be more interested in a coupe if I'm being honest, but for a very long time, especially in the Canadian market, they've basically been commanding list price or over list. So the vast majority of them, one second. Where the vast majority of the SVs for sale, at least in Canada, have been priced between $700,000 and $800,000, which is a ton of money for a car. In some cases, that's actually over list price. I could never justify that much money, and over the last 2 years, as I more or less predicted, they've actually been dropping quite significantly, where you can now get an SV for the low 500s, depending on options, of course, and how much mileage is on the car, but I honestly wouldn't mind having one with slightly higher mileage. So for the most part, it is now a more attainable car for me. It's still a lot more money than I think I would ever want to spend on a vehicle, but if I ever did come to the decision that I was going to spend that much money on a car, it would probably be on an Aventador SV. It's also one of those cars that if they drop enough, I think it's a possibility that down the road they could actually go back up in value. And then the final car on my list isn't actually a specific car, but more so a car from a specific brand, and that is a Ferrari. Here's a fun fact, I've never actually driven a Ferrari. I've driven plenty of Lamborghinis, I've driven almost every single McLaren, but I've never even, I don't think, sat in a Ferrari if I'm being honest. But it's a car or a brand that definitely intrigues me, and I've heard so many good things. I like so many of their cars. The main reason why I just haven't had one is based on the fact that all the Ferraris that I've wanted over the years are the Ferraris that you can't really buy, or if you do plan on buying them, you're probably going to pay $100,000 to $200,000 over list. If I could have my pick of any Ferrari that's realistically within my price range, I think at the very top of my list would be the 458 Speciale. To me, that's just one of the most beautiful cars that money can buy. I'd have a red one with the white and blue stripe, but honestly, I'm not too picky on spec with that one. But even that car is still commanding over list, and it's kind of Aventador SV money, and between those two, I think I might rather have the Aventador. I also really like the 488 Pista, I'm not going to lie about that, but those are still way over list as well. And even, honestly, the new F8 Tributo, I think, is a gorgeous looking car, and I'm curious to see what those are going to do in the market once they actually land in Canada, because I'm not sure that they've even delivered any at this point. But for me, in terms of like realistic Ferrari options, I've been curious about an F12, just because I think that the values on those have dropped to a point where I don't see them dropping necessarily too much more. Again, right now it's really difficult to say, but again, I think long term, because the V12 is more or less going extinct, I would say, that is a car that could potentially hold its value really well and maybe even go back up. I think realistically an F12 definitely would be something that I could see myself buying if I came across the right deal. And there you have it, guys. That is my top 5 realistic want list of cars that I could see myself owning in the near future. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Is there a car that I should be considering that I'm not? Let me know your feedback down below in the comments. As always, if you have any suggestions for content that you'd like to see on the channel, feel free to leave that down below in the comment section as well. If you guys enjoyed the video, please don't forget to support it with a like. It helps the channel out tremendously. And if you're not subscribed to the channel already, weekly videos on car stuff, don't forget to subscribe, hit the bell notification so you don't miss out. And with that said, we'll see you in the next one.